So with the death of Amenhotep II, there seems to be a dispute as to who's going to be the next king of Egypt. So Tuthmoses IV was not the first son of the king, and his reign has two lots of dates: 1401 BCE to 1391 BCE, or it could be 1397 BCE to 1388 BCE. Now, he was a usurper for sure, and remember, there are two powers in Egypt. There's the king, who is the living Horus, and the gods, and both can make laws. Tuthmoses IV tells us that on a visit to the Giza pyramids, he slept overnight at the foot of the Sphinx. Well, what's interesting about the Sphinx during this time is the Egyptians had identified the Sphinx as a form of Ra, the Ra-Horakhty, when the Ra-Horakhty was Eastern Horus rising fused with the sun god Ra, which went back to 12th dynasty Middle Kingdom. So that's 500 years ago. The time difference between the 18th dynasty and the 4th dynasty is about 1200 years. You have to remember, kings of Egypt were not recording national archives. They were recording his story. So any records we have is about his king's reign. It's not about the ancestors. Their best attempt of getting a timeline was a king's list. Remember, where they put their name on a list going all the way back to Nama to prove their right to rule. Anyway, Tuthmoses IV says he's sleeping at the foot of the of Ra-Horakhty at Giza, and the god comes to him in a dream and says, if you clear all the sand away from my body and restore my image, you will be the next king of Egypt. So this is his way of using the gods to empower him with kingship as a usurper. Maybe that's why he took the name Ra, which means the manifestations of the sun god Ra. Wow. So he built at Karnak, and he built a 32-meter obelisk, the biggest one. Unfortunately, when the Romans ruled Egypt, they borrowed it and took it back to Rome and put it in their circus, because by that time Egypt was seen as the land of civilization, just as the Victorians in the UK borrowed from the Greeks and the Romans, because they saw the Greek and the Roman culture as being highly more sophisticated than the Victorian age, which I think is quite funny, because that's when the industrial age was created. He also built at Karnak for the common people. He built a chapel which was at the back of the temple, behind the most beautiful of places. So people who didn't have access to that open courtyard and the bark of Amun-Ra could go around the back of the temple and present their offerings. And he also built a small hallway at Karnak as well, near this chapel. And it was all for the benefit of the people, inscribed with this beautiful image and all the magical spells, so it'd be working forever and ever. Wow. The king was buried in KV 43, but he was actually found in his father's tomb, Amenhotep II, in KV 35, when it became a royal cache in the 21st dynasty. The rediscovery of KV 43 was by a young archaeologist. He was an apprentice to William Matthews Flanders Petrie, so he learned his trade off a Petrie, and his name was Howard Carter. Ta-da! So, famous for discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun, but he worked tirelessly in Egypt for years. And he was hire an archaeologist. So this is the time when you could go to Egypt if you was a rich gentleman and you could hire an archaeologist. I think it's quite funny, you know, as if they're all standing up against the wall, you know, all these guys. I need an archaeologist for the day. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, that's how I'm thinking. Anyway, the person who hired him was Theodore Davis, an American antiquarian who had a keen interest in collecting for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. When the king's body was recovered from the royal cache in 1898, Grafton Elliott Smith conducted an unwrapping of the king's body in 1899. Now, for me, there's two things that are going on here. First one is, this was a living person and they made provision for a burial. And as an archaeologist, I'm interested in the information that they can give me from height, weight, etc. But I need to respect that they were once a human being just like me. So going around unwrapping mummies at this time was a big no-no. If I'd been there, I'd have got a big stick and given them a big beating and saying, it's not about you. Wait until we develop the technology to examine these without damaging them. Because as soon as you unwrap them, they started crumbling away. And the Victorians were weirdos. They believed that if you crushed mummies and put the powder on your food, you'd live longer. In fact, there was an industry of it. So much so that when the Egyptian robbers ran out of Egyptian mummies to crush up, Egyptian mummy parts, they created a whole new industry of mummifying recently deceased people and selling those bits off. Now, in my 35-year career, I've come across so many feet of King Khufu of the 4th dynasty. I didn't know he was a 6-legged guy, because there's all these museums in the UK and around Europe that have got King Khufu's foot. Well, he only had 2, he didn't have 6, but there's 6 kicking around. And that's because of these Victorians going on their grand tour and wanting to take back a souvenir, and someone's got them in the back room and say, hey, I've got King Khufu's foot. It's yours for 50 quid. And these mugs brought them back to the UK, and when they died, they had them donated to their local museums. But there are 6 feet of King Khufu kicking around because of this new industry that sprang up during the Victorian age, where there was such a demand. I come across people so many times who want to own the past. They want to hold things, touch things. That's how they connect with it. Whereas me, I want to know, where did they get the raw material? Who was the person who actually made the article? What was it used for, and why was it discarded? So that's what I'm interested in when I see objects. I don't want to keep them. I don't want to possess them. I don't want to like that over them. And if you are a private collector who've got illegal antiquities, get down to your local museum and make an anonymous donation now, because there might be some information there which will be useful for current studies. Okay, so unfortunately, the one thing that Grafton Elliott Smith did discover is that the king only lived until he was between 25 and 28, and he ruled Egypt for 10 years. So he came to the throne probably I would have thought when he was 18 rather than 15. If he was 15, then there was a faction involved to make him king of Egypt. So, you know, invisible people in the background. If he was 18, he would have been the same age of his father, and he would have been classed as an adult then. And the other thing that Draft and Elliot Smith deduced is that maybe that Tuthmoses IV and Amenhotep II, and also Tuthmoses III, they all died sort of quite young for kings. Kings usually ruled into 60 or 70 years of age. He deduced that they were suffering with a form of epilepsy. Let's go off to the Valley of the Kings and let's have a look at an isometric map of the King's Tomb. So we've got the descending passageway, and then we've got that what the early Victorian archaeologists called the well. Well, we know that that's a test pit now to see if it's all shale before they start digging out the burial chamber at that level. So it's there to see if there's any quartz, and if there is any quartz, then that's when they're going to start building above the quartz deposit so they don't run into any trouble. So this Essner shale is very easy to mine, and remember they're only using copper tools which have been warmed up and cooled to give it a nice hard tip. They might have had bronze tools, but we haven't found any yet. And they definitely wouldn't have had any access to iron tools at this time. So that's quite interesting. Part of his tomb is decorated. So we've got the burial chamber and parts of the upper chamber, and it is beautifully decorated. You know, the 18th dynasty, it was pretty good quality. Not as good as the 12th dynasty, not as good as the Middle Kingdom. They were the high artistic achievers, but the 18th dynasty did try to copy, to live up to that standard, and they did quite a good job, quite a pretty good job, especially in these tombs. So they've cut the shale, then they've got to smooth those walls flat before they can start decorating them. So that in itself, rubbing down all those rough walls to get a flat wall, amazing. So I think this tomb was started during the reign of Amenhotep II for his successor. And then when Tuthmoses IV made his bid for power, he took over the project. Anyway, when he died, he was succeeded by Amenhotep III, and he's a character in himself. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this this presentation. Hit the subscribe button. Karnak is involved in this video, and I'd love to go to Egypt and do a video tour of Karnak, and you couldn't do it in one, it would go on forever. To do that I need funding, so if you could go to the link on the next page, which comes at the end of this video, and make a small donation of say £1, that would be really helpful.